Let's talk about the Four Quartets by T.S. Eliot. These were published between 1935 and 1942. Eliot actually published the first of the four quartets before he mulled over the other three, and the other three were written during World War II, so they have a different kind of intensity than the first one, and we'll get to see that as we walk through these quartets. I love poetry. I love getting to discuss poetry. Poetry to me lifts us out of the clatter of everyday reality and gives us a new way of listening. So I hope that we get to discover that while we listen to the quartets. A brief biography of Eliot. He is an American writer that is now considered a British writer. Pretty much everything for Eliot changes in 1927 when he becomes a member not only of the Anglo-Catholic Church, which of course changes much of his poetry, this conversion to Christianity, but also becomes a British citizen. So we have the pre-1927 Eliot being somewhat of an American poet and an atheist poet, a nihilist poet, a poet full of riddles, and very much a modernist poet. And then we have a transformation that takes place after his conversion in 1927, but much of the poetry still retains his voice. In the early Eliot or the late Eliot, which is often how people refer to it, we see a consistency of the things that mattered to Eliot and the questions that he's asking. He was a philosopher before he was a poet, and when we read Eliot, we get a sense of these timeless questions, this love for wisdom and attempts to understand what is true. For Eliot, the connection between truth and beauty was intimate. What is beautiful is true. What is true is beautiful, as Keats tells us. And so Eliot retains this love for philosophy and for the big questions of his time, especially things about the meaning of words and ways of knowing. He studied philosophy not only at Harvard, but also at the Sorbonne in Paris. And he studied in Oxford, though while he was living there, he tried to stay out of Oxford as much as he possibly could. And then returned to Harvard to work on his PhD. He never actually finished. He never took his exams for his PhD. But he is considered a philosopher as well as a poet. He was married twice in his life. The first marriage to Vivian Heywood has become kind of a story of legend. There's even been film and play adaptations about that relationship. It was a roller coaster. This was his pre-conversion days when he met Vivian, fell for her, married her quickly, only to discover there was just a lot of unresolved issues for her. She ended up in a mental hospital late in life and was there until she died. He also fell in love with Emily Hale, and in 2020, those letters have been opened up, so we get to see the heart of their relationship with one another. And it seems like we don't know all the details about that relationship, but he was still married to Vivian technically while that relationship with Emily Hale was happening. And then he was married later in life to a woman who worked for him and who continued to dedicate herself to his legacy even after he died. He died in 1965, though much of his output as a poet really takes place 20 years prior to that. He didn't write a lot in the later half of his life. And he was cremated, and his remains are at St. Michael's and All Angeles Church in East Coker, which is where his ancestors are from.